Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about question 1, which is how does your product use or challenge conventions, and how does it represent social groups or issues? So I'm going to be breaking down each page and talking about everything, which you are able to follow along in the Google Slides, which I've put above, which is this. But I'm going to go on to my actual website and show you myself. So on this page, let's start off with the masthead. So I followed the typical conventions by having it at the top of the page. This is quite normal. I don't think that when I was doing all of my research, I didn't see any major magazines moving this. This is partly because they've got their house style, and it's all about how for Vogue example, it's always at the top. The model or the main image will always interact a little bit with the masthead, but it's always at the top. They don't normally move it around. I really liked this idea of using this convention, and I thought that it would be a nice way to show that I'm following the conventions just to start off. I also think that it would look a little bit odd if you had the masthead anywhere else on the page, but that's just my personal opinion. Okay, so just quickly mentioning, when you're creating the magazine, you have to know what your house style is. Otherwise, it can be a bit confused and send mixed messages to your audience. So, because of this, I needed to make sure that I knew what my house style was before I started doing the contents page, masthead, or any of my article pages. So when I was thinking about that in mind, I had to think about the colours, the font sizes, the positioning and the angles, the clothing, literally everything you have to think about. When, as the audience, you don't normally appreciate all of that work and effort which has gone into the decision making, which is definitely something which I've taken from this, as I wouldn't normally be like, oh yeah, look at this. So this means that they've just clearly thrown it all together, haven't thought much about it, when in real life I couldn't be much more wrong. So I think that this whole thing has made me appreciate how much effort and work goes into every single detail, and that it's always there for a reason. So yeah, for my house style, I chose to go with like the typical girly pinky sort of colour. So this is already starting one of my representational issues of gender, and how there is clearly a clear divide amongst everybody that pink means girl and blue means boy. I wanted to challenge this representational issue on my front cover. So I've got the pink background, which is, it's complementing, it's not clashing with this blue denim jacket which she's wearing, and also the main cell line is in blue, but then my masthead is in a rich purple. So already this is going to be eye-catching for the audience, because normally they'll have a magazine which is either that rich purple or the more lighter blue colour. So by having both, I've definitely attracted more audience than I would elsewhere. Okie dokie. So moving on to the cell lines. This is one of the conventions which I definitely did follow, and it was actually here. I don't know why that just went forward. Yeah, it was one of the first things which I did talk about because I knew how important the cell lines were for the whole magazine. So typically for a magazine, they'll have 3 or 4 cell lines, excluding their main cell line, which is this one. So I have gone for quite a typical look for mine. So for example, this one, I've got a variety of different sizes and fonts for my cell lines. For example, this 10 is obviously larger than any of the words around it. I've also decided that I would have the Embevel and Boss font, what's it called? The special effects for it. This is just then it can relate to my masthead, and there's a little bit more of a connection and a link between that, which personally I quite like having the links, but I know it's not for everyone. Again, it depends on the magazine actually, to be fair. So some magazines choose to have the same spacing here. Some like to have like obviously bigger gaps and smaller gaps, and they'd have like this and then they'd have another cell line here or something like that. But I wanted to have a nice consistency through mine, so I made sure that all of these gaps here were exactly the same. That goes for this one over here. Of course, it's not taking into account my issue and my price, but we'll come back to that. So yeah, that's quite a simple, and I just followed the conventions for the cell lines because they are very important for the overall look of the masthead. Moving on to my main image now. She is obviously going to be the main focus for a masthead. Well, not a masthead, a front cover. When you see all of the magazines lined up, it's the picture which first draws in all of the attention from the audience. So obviously they're going to need to pay a lot of attention to them. So as you can see, I've got her in quite a engaging position where by the way which her head is slightly over her shoulder and looking. It makes the audience think in relation to my masthead. So going back to this slide quickly, you can see here that is the first paragraph which I talked about, how it has 2 meanings, and that it could talk about how you are technically revealing different things, but then you are holding them back because you're not letting everyone know about it. I really like this idea, and this is exactly what my main image is doing. She's capturing that very well, actually, in my opinion. So for mise-en-scène, for example, I wanted to make sure that she wasn't wearing anything too tight for the front, just because it can give off the wrong stereotypes. And bearing in mind that I've already talked about the representational issue of gender and how that can be quite I'm not going to say anything else about that for now, but so because of all of that issues and those issues, I wanted her to wear something a little bit less tight, and it could be more gender neutral and all of that. So that's why I chose to make her wear something baggy instead of tight. I also wanted to make sure that I had like a clean cut colour scheme, so I didn't want to have her wearing a brighter colour, for example, I don't know, yellow or anything like that on the front cover, because it would really go against my whole point of the blue and the pink complementing each other to challenge that representational issue. So just going back to my main model for a minute, you can see that there's something quite intriguing about her face and expression. I asked her to open her mouth a little bit, but still smiling. We did have a bit of a laugh doing this because it was a bit stupid at the time, but I think that it's definitely better than just smiling, because it almost looks as though she's trying to say something to the audience and let them know some information which perhaps they didn't know, which is again linking it to the whole meaning behind my masthead, which is good. So personally, I didn't use any props or anything for this image because I wanted to make sure that all of the attention was on my main model and my masthead. As you can see, there is a little bit of interaction between the two, but this is like a typical convention which quite a lot of magazines do follow, so there's nothing unusual there. Okie dokie. So for the direct address, we can see that it is clearly in her eyes, although that isn't all full circle. You can clearly see that it is in her eyes as they're looking directly at the audience, which, weirdly enough, if you move your head, it looks as though she's following you. It's one of those weird looking pictures, but this was intentional because I wanted to make sure that it would grab the audience's attention no matter where they're standing, which is pretty powerful, actually. So, moving on to the barcode at the bottom. It is typical for anything, any product, if that's food, makeup, clothes, anything, they need to have some sort of a barcode on them so then you can scan them and buy them. So obviously I would need to include this so then people who go to a physical store will be able to purchase my magazine. Although it's not obvious at first, you might be able to see that I have included my website in the masthead. This honestly took me forever to try and make sure that it was at the right angle and the same angle as my masthead. I also wanted to make sure that you could still read it and that it made sense, and there was a lot to take into consideration and everything like that, but generally I think that this works pretty well, as once you see it you can't unsee it, but when you're just looking at my magazine for the first time you don't normally see it, if that makes any sense whatsoever. So moving back to the price and the issue here, I've already mentioned these just briefly, but this is a typical convention. It allows collectors, for example, for collectors it's very important to include the issue and the year, so then they are able to make sure that they haven't missed out any. It also just enables the general audience to see if they are up to date on fashion or if they're a season behind or a year behind. It just lets people know where they're at. I decided that I was going to have my price smaller, in a smaller font, and just beneath my issue and all of that. This is again a very typical convention. It's so then it doesn't impede on the rest of the page or the front cover. I think it's quite a sneaky trick, if I'm honest. And I also did a sneaky trick for the price itself. So linking back to my audience survey, which I did a while ago now, you might have been able to see that for the price, it was mainly between 4 and 4 was about the right amount. I think that had the most just. £3 had quite a lot. £5 had about 20%. So you can see that it did significantly reduce when it got to the £5 and £6. But there is something about putting £4.88 which tricks the mind to make you think that you're getting a better deal. It's just psychological and all of that. But I really wanted to include this because that's a typical trap which a lot of magazines do, but also other brands and products for everything. So as you can see up here, or as you know down here, if that little box will go away, please go away. Alright, I'll just scroll. So here, I really like the idea of using this strap line, as it created almost like a border between the next pages, but for later on in the magazine it does create one of my own house styles, which I do really like. So that's part of the reason why. I don't know if you can see, but right here it may look a little bit fuzzy or just a bit special. This was actually on purpose. This was the drop shadow, and again it links to more of my own house style which I create and everything like that. Personally, I thought that it added something, although I know that some people express their dislike for this. But overall, it was for my magazine and not theirs. So I wanted to go with what I thought would be best for the audience. So just up here, quickly, you can see that I have a competition or an advert up here. This is again such a normal thing for magazines to include. It could be, well, in the fashion magazines, it could be replacing the box out, which on, say, a film magazine would advertise a completely different genre of movie. So say the whole magazine for Empire was about their new Endgame film, which is Endgame. Yeah, that's it. The new Endgame, which is coming out in April. So if the whole magazine was based about that, they would have a little box out in the corner talking about, I don't know, the latest Simpson thing. So clearly those two posts are not related, but it means that the magazine is welcoming a wider audience range, which is always a good thing. So moving back to the fashion magazines quickly, this is again such a typical thing to do that I had to include it. So moving on quickly to the conventions which I haven't included, this would be, as I just started talking about, the box out. So personally, I didn't think that this would suit my magazine, as it's more for graphic novels or like TV stuff. You need pictures which relate to films or something completely different category. It's not a normal convention for a fashion magazine to have an advert for a music selling place. It's just not the done thing, as people picking up a fashion magazine might not be all that interested in in music. Sorry, I had a complete blank then. Yeah, so that's why I didn't include that. So, my main cell line here. So, unlike a lot of magazines, I decided that I wanted to have this on a tilt at an angle. This isn't normally a done thing because the magazines like Vogue and Elle and all of them want to make it as easy as possible for all of the audience to read and see their to see all of their cell lines and main cell lines. However, I really like the idea of having it at an angle. To be exact, it's the same angle of which her this part and that part of her shoulder lines up. So for me, that was quite important, and I really did want to include it because it became more engaging for the audience, because they'd be like, oh, why is it like that? But it also drags in more attention to the masthead. No, the main image. God. So it's drawing more attention into the main image, which is always a good thing. So, unlike in a typical magazine, you would see one main colour, then you'd see black, white, and maybe grey at a push. So, this was not typical convention to follow, but actually on this page I have my main house style colour. I have the white, I have the black, but then I also have this blue coming in. So again, this was all to make sure that I address the representational issue of gender, to show that it's not just about the females and the whole pink vibe, and that if you look closely, you don't even have to look that closely, it is the majority of this page. The majority of this page is blue, so I thought that it would be fitting actually to relate my main article about blue, well, to her with blue. So yeah, this was just another way for me to engage and capture the audience. So I don't know if you noticed, but this is the last thing which I haven't talked about yet. So this cell line in the masthead isn't a typical convention for magazines to follow. So personally, I really like this idea, and I think that it does fill up some space which needed to be filled in the masthead. So when I saw magazines such as Elle, for example, they had a lot of dead space going on between their letters, and personally I thought that this would be a really good place to advertise another cell line. And you can see that I've used a different colour than these two. I've also used a different font. Literally everything different to make sure that it doesn't blend in with A, the masthead, and B, the other cell lines. I think that it's quite tactically positioned, the way that it's at the point of her head, if you can see that. God, there's so many lines. Why don't we change it to yellow? So here you can see it's right at the point of her head, which really makes it stand out, and yeah, just generally a little bit different. So I think that sums up my front cover. Oh yeah, I've also got this here. So I was playing around with this and toying with the idea of using the rule of 3 when it came to a cell line. I know from English that it's a really powerful use of literature, and it is pretty good when you can do it right. So in the end, I thought with myself and I thought, right, let's put it in, let's use it. So I've used the repetition of the word new, as people, especially at the beginning of the year in February and January, they do want to be associated with new things and a new start to the whole year. That's why I've put new year, new season, new you. I think that this can really relate to the audience and definitely does capture the attention, but not too much that it's dragging away from the everything else which I want to. This is a cute colour. Let's move on to this one. So, moving on to my contents page. So, for the conventions which I did follow was basically the overall look. So, in a typical contents page, you're going to have multiple images, you're going to have categories or subheadings with the image captions, article descriptors, just all of this basically. I think that that's the first thing which really stands out to me. So moving on again to the conventions which I did follow. So this would be starting off with this part here. This is actually quite a large part of my contents page. I didn't intend for it to take up this much room, but in the end it just did. Actually, I do quite like it now, so it's not the end of the world. This is a typical convention which almost every single magazine follows. It's just to reassure the audience what magazine they're looking at and how it actually does relate to their stuff. So as you can see here, I've also put just quite simply on the front, and it's the same cell lines which are on the front, and then you can find them on the right pages, which is always helpful. So I personally really like this idea, especially how I've gone to magazines before and I've seen something on the front which has really captured my attention, and I've been like, well, where's this in the rest of the magazine then? So this enables people who were encaptured by certain cell lines on the front to find out where they can get different things, such as the cozy leggings, which are on page 53. See, it's quite simple to follow. It's not that difficult, and that's why magazines do it like this. So moving on to let's just start with the image captions. As you can see, for all of my images, they have got a caption. This is a very, very typical convention. There's nothing really broken here. Yeah, it's just a typical. I've also made sure that all of my numbers are large enough to capture the attention of the audience, but then not for too long. So that's definitely worked out pretty well actually in the whole scheme of things. So the next convention which I've followed is the categories and the subheadings. So in every single magazine contents page, they will have columns and columns of writing about what is in their magazine. So some magazines decide that they're not going to have this at the very front of their magazine, and they have like honestly it's ridiculous, some of it. They've got like 30 odd what are they called, advert pages, where they'll get Gucci in, they'll get Michael Kors, they'll get Ted Baker, they'll get honestly every single designer which you can think about. They've got an advert for them there, which they will definitely get a lot of benefit out of being associated with them. Anyway, going back to the categories and subheadings. So it's quite normal for a magazine to have regulars. This is just so then the people who do collect the magazines will know that it's the same. Well, they will obviously know that never changes. But the people who just pick up your magazine for the first time, it shows them it shows them what all of your magazine is about, really, which is definitely something. So under all of these categories, they have the subheadings and the article descriptors. So this is quite normal for magazines. Some will have more writing for others than some different types, and yeah, it's quite normal for all of this. It just informs the audience a little bit more about where they can find places and what they need to do for it. But yeah, it's pretty good actually. Pretty good. Moving on. So as you can see on this page, the majority of it is filled with images. So I have got, well, my intention was that you would have like a smooth following curve around each side of my around all of my categories here. I think that this has worked pretty well, and I'm actually pretty proud of it. I'm not gonna lie. It's worked better than I thought it would, which is always a good thing. So I've also made sure that I've included the issue, the year and all of that up there. So then it does, again, reassure the audience that it is from the same magazine and that they are in the right place. I've included my contact, well, not my contacts, my magazine's contact here. I decided that I was going to use a very basic and easy name for all of the accounts, so then there was a nice consistency, and that if people did want to follow them, it would be very, very simple, which is always a good thing. So I think that's all of the, and another convention which I followed here was for the preview. So it's quite typical for especially fashion magazines, because they need to fit so much on their contents page. It's quite typical for them to have a preview, which is technically just another excuse to have a mini contents page a bit later on. I've also included a massive subscription bar, which lets the audience know what they get if they subscribe and how it will definitely benefit them in good ways. So this is again just a typical convention, nothing really broken. So I've also down here got this bar, which, if you remember, I had on my front cover. So this is where my own conventions start coming into place. So normally a magazine would just have the page number, the magazine, the website, and the issue and date. So I thought that I would be a little bit special, some people would say, but I wanted to show there was a cohesiveness and just it all links nicely together by having this bar at the bottom. So as you can see, for the conventions which I didn't follow on this page, it was mainly around the word contents. So if you go onto my article draft, you'll be able to see that I really did toy around with how I wanted to place my contents, like the words itself. Personally, I prefer not to have it that big, as I think it's obvious what the page is, so I don't see the point of wasting more than enough space on something which the audience already knows that they're looking at. Like, there's no logic in that, in my opinion. So I simply didn't include it, which I'm very happy that I stuck to it. I also didn't include any credits for the photos. A lot of magazines at this point do, but I've done that later on, and I know that if my magazine continued, that I definitely would make sure that they had all the credits there. So this, I didn't include the credits just because I didn't want to bombard the audience with so much writing, because there's already quite a lot of words on this page, which can be seen as off-putting. So I didn't want to even jeopardize that chance, which I had. So now that I've gone through the conventions which I have and haven't followed, I just want to go back to the images which I've taken on this page. So as you'll be able to see, I have my main image here. So in order to make her stand out from all of the others, the first thing which I did was make her larger than all of the other images, especially the two which are closest to her. I also made sure that her eyes were dead on and that her face was pretty much square to the camera, which you can see here. So I know that, for example, here and here, you've got a similar sort of style, but it's the angle is more exaggerated, or the face is turned more away, or even the eyes are closed or looking down or looking up. None of them have got as such intense direct eye contact as my main article has, which is a good thing. So yeah, that's part of the reason. I also decided to cut out my main image. So this was again, so then she would stand out compared to all of the other images which are pasted against a photography shoot, outside, these two again, photo shoots. But I think that it definitely does stand out that she's not just against the white or black or grey or purple background. It definitely makes her stand out to my audience, which is a good thing on the whole scheme of things. Moving on to this image here. As you can see, this one is in black and white. As none of my other images are in black and white, you might be thinking at first, why has she done this? There's not even a convention here. It just seems a little bit random. This was intentional, so I personally didn't see the point of having colour in this one, as I wanted to create more of a mystery and keep the audience guessing when it came to this page, which I genuinely think that I have done pretty well, which is always a good thing. But when you turn to my article page about her later, you'll notice that it's mainly about fashion. So by having her in black and white, especially as a fashion icon, will intrigue the audience to open the magazine itself and have a look further. To the image beneath her. So as you can see, actually on both these images, I decided to fade areas. So I did these for different reasons. This one here was because I didn't like the idea of having a sharp edge near my main article's head, as I knew that obviously you'd get distracted by this. You wouldn't mean to, but it's just human nature that you would get distracted, and I didn't want that to happen, so I didn't include it. This here it was mainly about the harsh edge. God, I can't speak. But I like the idea of having it faded to show where the main direction of the light was hitting her. So you can see here and here is all lighter. So I love the idea of having it as though it is meant to represent the light itself, which is quite a cool and interesting idea. So moving on to these images over here, you can see that although this one may seem a little bit dark and underlit in places, that it's bright enough to still see her face. And especially for her t-shirt here, this little bit of colour really pops out from the image, which is definitely something to talk about. For both of these images, I tried out a lot more things, and I definitely experimented with them in ways which I didn't for any of the 4 other images on this page. So for this one here of my ballerina, you can see that I've got some quite obstructing strips in the middle of the picture. Some of my audiences might see this as a distraction from the image, but once you know the context behind the image, it's quite symbolic. So as I know, I took the photos. These were the ballerina strips which were tied on her shoes. So she had another set in case they broke, which apparently is a massive thing that you need to make sure that you do. So by me incorporating these strips will definitely intrigue the ballerinas who might be interested in this. I definitely think that it is something to look into, and it creates a connection between some audience members, which is a really nice thing to have, actually. And this image, so this yellow stuff around her may be seeming a little bit odd when this was intentional. I'm not going to say that it wasn't, because it was. So I like the idea of creating the illusion of radiant or a little bit godlike by having this almost halo effect around her. So in order to do this, I didn't use a tripod at all. I didn't for any of these photos, but I know that you should really use them if you want to have a longer shutter speed. So I didn't have the tripod, and I did have a longer shutter speed. By doing this, it created this blurry radiant effect, which actually relates to my article descriptor, which personally I think is a really nice connection, and it definitely does intrigue my audience. So as you can see here, I've got this white outline for this image, this one. I did put them on these, although obviously how it's against this background, you can't really see it. So this was again just to show a little bit more of a difference, and yeah, it was just to make sure that they didn't bleed into each other, because I did try that but it didn't look right, and it's just to show that these are different images. It was on purpose, it's not by accident. I know that it's there, so yeah. Yeah, so just quickly going back to this image here of my main article. So on the front, you can see that there is the nice blue and purple contrasting or complementing colours. Now on this page, we're starting to see a bit of yellow and the blue, which again, this has connotations of being more towards the guy sort of audience. Whereas, as you can see, the background, this image, all of my mastheads, the article descriptors, the boxes behind all of these, they're all purple. So I've got that nice contrast, but then it's complementing each other quite nicely, which I really do like. So just another thing quickly, the background was a convention which I did break quite strongly. I didn't like the idea of having the white background when that wouldn't have fit in with what I wanted to do. So I've got it on here as well. It's such a subtle difference, but you can notice it. So that's why this 10 stands out. It's why this line stands out. It's just so that I can do that. So I decided that I wanted to have this just to hit the edge of it. And actually, when I talk about it on here, I talk about it because I wanted to appeal to a social group, an understated social group, which it doesn't really have as much credit as it probably should. So I am talking about dyslexic people right now, and people who find it difficult to read on white paper. So I know that being a teenager, you can get quite a lot of pressure and everything like that from other members of your group. So to have a magazine like this, which can do it very subtly, but it is still there for a reason, will show my audience that they do care and that they are trying to be a good group, or whatever you want to say about it. So I personally think that that's a really important point to point out, as that is intentional. This purpley pink background, that was intentional, and it was for the dyslexic social group, which are understated. It's so then they can read a magazine which is popular without feeling targeted for having to pick out a special magazine, which means they can't read on white paper. So that's why I chose to write on pink, or on off pink. So this was my first double page. So as I have done before, I'm going to be talking about the conventions which I have and what I haven't after that. So for the conventions which I have followed is the masthead, this intro article, obviously the article body itself, my pull quote, and my main image, and the image captions, like this one. That is it for a typical double page spread. Sometimes they will include a secondary image. It's not always the case, but sometimes they do include these. So, talking about my masthead first of all, dress to impress. That's how I wanted to read it, and that's how I do read it. So I spent forever making sure that all of these lines matched up and that it was perfect to the T. That was a very wonky line. Anyway, so I wanted to make sure that it was like all in line and everything was nice and symmetrical, and yeah, so that took me a long time. It is normally a typical convention for the masthead to have a variety of different sizes and shapes and colours and everything like that. So when it came to the colours, I wanted to include the ones which I had for my masthead, which is obviously this pinky purple. I think that this worked pretty well. There wasn't anything too strange or too odd about that, so I think it worked okay in the end. Yeah, I was quite happy with it. I also decided that I was going to use the Embevel and Emboss, which I used on my front cover for the masthead as well as the cell lines. This was basically just to then really sink into the fact that this is all connected. All of it. It is all connected. So that's why I did that. So, although it's not obvious, but this here, my intro article, actually gives a lot about my article itself, like the article body. However, because I chose to use quite a dull grey colour, it doesn't stand out. It almost drops back on the page from the masthead and the body of the article, which I think is pretty cool actually. Not gonna lie, I'm quite happy with that. So I did this because, again, I didn't want to distract the attention away from my main body of the text as well as the masthead. I think it's done that pretty well. I've also made sure that it is, again, all in line with each other, so nothing's sticking out too far and doesn't look out of place. This is quite normal for a magazine to do this, so there's nothing too different there. However, I did write a little bit more than a typical intro article, but I thought that it was important. So when it came to the article body itself, when it came to the article body itself, you can see here I have my drop cap. This is a typical convention for any article. At the start they'll have a drop cap. So I found it pretty cool how you could play around with how many lines down you wanted it, as well as how many letters. So you could have selected like 4 or 5 or something like that, but I chose 1 for this page, and it did work pretty well, and it does grab in the attention and just breaks down everything a little bit nicer. So as you can see, I do have my house colour coming through quite strongly everywhere, that purpley colour, but then again I've contrasted it to this navy blue and white. I did really want to make sure and stress the fact that although there is purple, that it doesn't mean that it doesn't have elements to it which can't attract the male audience as well. It might not intrigue them as much, but this page I personally think works pretty well, as you can find out where the best places to travel are and what sort of things to wear them, and that's what the article's about itself, which I think the article tone is quite nice, as it's relaxed and it's quite informal. So it does make it more relatable and approachable for the audience themselves. So moving on to my pull quote. So this was the first pull quote which I have in my whole magazine, so it was quite important for me to get this one right. As you can see on my drafting page, I did play around with this at points quite a lot, but I'm happy with how it ended up. So I decided that I was going to have these lines to divide the article and my pull quote. So when you click the text wrap button for the words, it means that it will move all of the article about. So you have to make sure that you got it right in between an article, for example here. So in order to show that this wasn't connecting these two, I put these 2 bars here, which I'm very happy with. I also chose to use my house style colour and everything like that, which is good. So one of the things which I noticed first is this, which is a tagline basically. This is and isn't conventional. That's why I'm going to talk about it now. So the reasons why it is conventional is that every article normally has the name of the person on it. However, it's quite unconventional to have it in the same format as your competition. But I wanted to show again that there is a tangible link throughout all of my magazine and that it all links up quite nicely. So moving on to my the conventions which I broke. So this fashion review was actually one of them, although it works quite nicely, and you would expect a fashion review to be in a magazine. However, this one was quite different. So if you read my contents page, you'll find out that there is a magazine review where my magazine will take in comments from the audience and they'll put them straight into the magazine. So this is the example of that. This isn't a typical convention for magazines to follow, as it can be quite time consuming and everything like that, and distracting actually from everything else. So I wanted to make sure that it was a bit different and that it wasn't typical. So you're probably wondering what this big purple thing is here. This was I intended it for it to be a decorative strip. So it's meant to be like a bookmark. So if you imagine a typical book, you normally have a piece of ribbon which you can put in a page so then you don't lose your place. This is basically what I was trying to be creating, but it was also a really simple and effective way for me to get my house colour or my house style in there as well. So obviously I went for it. I actually do quite like this, especially how it's not completely solid and it's got a bit of pasty, so you can still see her shoulder coming through. This isn't a normal convention, as I did mention before. It's quite unusual to have this, and that's one of the reasons why I really loved it. Okay, so I've also got a lot of secondary images on this page, which, although typically magazines do have secondary images, they don't normally have 6. I really like the idea of this, especially how when you see that all these line up very nicely, and I even made sure that all of these were like the same as well. So that was a big point for me personally. Yeah, so that was a convention which I broke. I decided that I wanted to include more than one secondary image because as my article was all about traveling and where you want to go, I didn't want to just limit myself to one secondary image, as it would be very difficult to choose the one place which I wanted to include, and there's nothing stopping you from incorporating multiple different ones. So that's what I did. I think that's pretty much it, because I don't want to repeat myself about this bar at the bottom or anything like that. So yeah. Oh, a quick thing. I broke the conventions when it came to my main image. So as you can see, there is no direct address coming through, unlike from the contents page and the front cover. So I think that although this worked out pretty well, it was intentional. I'm not saying that it wasn't, but I am definitely glad that I did include it, as it means it doesn't drag in more attention than it needs to. So when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about how on the other pages you do genuinely get distracted, maybe not on purpose, but you do get distracted about their eyes, because you can tell a lot about a person from their eyes. For example, here and there, and just even for these two, like, you do get distracted by people's eyes. So I decided that I wasn't going to have any of that. And by doing this, it really does draw in more attention to the article itself, and that's the main reason why I did it. So, moving on to my next double page. As you can see here, I've decided to use the same, when it came to the conventions which I broke and didn't break, the conventions which I didn't break was again the masthead. So I've got a variety of different fonts and sizes and all of that, and colours as well. It's definitely eye-catching. I've also made sure that I included the embevel and emboss effect to make sure that I got all of this. I also included a highlight for some of these, which it does make it stand out, and I do quite like it, to be fair. So, I followed the same rules for these, all of this, and I broke the conventions when it came to these and everything like that. And I did the same again for my secondary images. The things which I want to point out on this page are my picture descriptors, this main tagline, and the images themselves in this one, and obviously my masthead, as like every single page. So if I start up here with the tagline, on the previous page I had the banner which was relating to my front cover, but on this one I decided to go against this. This is purely because I thought that it would be quite overwhelming and distracting if I had so much going on, so I didn't want to overwhelm my audience too much. If we go over here to my image descriptors, again, so I've listed where all of my main pictures products are from. I didn't include the price as I didn't want to go into that sort of part of the magazine, which is breaking conventions, but I don't like the idea of people judging their clothing and everything by how much it costs. If they like it, they should go for it. That's my motto. That's why I've decided against including any prices throughout my whole magazine, except for the price to pay for the magazine. So as you can see, these images are different than these. So each one relates to my articles, but obviously these ones are different. So in each of these, I did try a different technique out. So on these two, for example, I included a spotlight effect, specifically on the jewellery. So this was to make sure that the audience didn't get distracted by the rest of the image and that they really did pay attention to that part of the image, which is what I wanted to do. Personally, I think that this one's a little bit too far, as it does look like a spotlight, but I think this one, I really like this one, as I haven't lost a detail in the jewellery itself, but I've toned down the rest of the image. So moving on to this image, as you can see, I have blurred the background and part of the hand. So then I'm literally just focusing on the delicate bracelet. I love the way in which the light has caught some of the chains to really highlight it. I think it's worked very nicely actually. And yeah, I really do like that. So moving on to this image. Again, I was playing with the lighting. I didn't have to blur the floor because people don't normally blur floors. Yeah, I did follow a few different ideas, like for example this one, so I caught that highlight on the foot, but this image was quite a nice image, the way which it was composed and the angles and everything, it was really nice, so I didn't need to tamper with it too much. This is one of my absolute favorite images ever, because of how you've got the attention to detail of the ring, but then you've also got the nail, very nice nails relating to the colour of the coffee, and how you've got the shadow going across the coffee, you've got the shadows of the mug, you've got the shadows of the hand, and the whole composition of the image and where it's taken, everything. I really, really like this page, or this image, really, really like it. I've also made sure that the most amount of exposure in this image is on the hand, which obviously includes the ring, which is important. This image is by far the strangest, because when you don't know, it looks like 2 feet with nothing attached to them, because I managed to get a dark enough background and rug that you couldn't see her legs anymore, hence why I've just drawn them on. This really does pay attention to the shoes, as you can't look anywhere else, otherwise it's just black. Talking about black, you may be wondering why my background is black. So this was intentional. Again, this is relating to the representational or the social group about dyslexia and how they find it difficult to read on white paper. I did this so then they wouldn't feel left out, and that they would feel as though they were included and can actually read this page, which is pretty important. Yeah, I think that was pretty important to make sure that I did. So when it came to some of the facial expressions for this one, as you can see, she is clearly quite happy, content, but again, there is no direct address coming through in this image. I chose to do this purely because, again, I didn't want to distract the audience from her eye contact, which is what I have done, or have not done in this case. I also decided that I would face my main image in the direction of the masthead. In fact, it looks like she's looking at it. By doing this, it really does drag more attention to the masthead, and yeah, it really, really does make attention. So this is the first page when my main image is not wearing anything blue. I wanted her to relate to my house style, which is the purple. Unfortunately, this meant that it wasn't base for the male audience, but it wouldn't really anyway, because if you look at all the jewelry, necklace, earring, bracelet, heels, rings, and shoes in general, they're not really a typical male purchase, which is why I thought that I could get away with including the purple image on this page, because it was intended for the female market anyway. So this page is very eye-catching because of how plain and simple it is. So as you can see here, I've gone back to my tagline with the relating it to the competition one on the front. This is again just to make sure that you can really see the relationship between them. Personally, I'm quite happy with this. I know that it does grab some attention, but it's not over the top. So moving on to the conventions which I have followed, this is obviously going to be the main image on this page. As you can see on here is my main image. So unlike before, as I said, you cannot see any purple on this page. This is again to make sure that I am really facing it that about the representational issue of gender. There is no purple on this page whatsoever, except for this bar, a very faint bar at that, across the bottom, which is just to relate it to all of the others. So I don't think that that's too or not enough imposing. I think it's quite nice, and yeah, I don't think that that's anything too wrong. So when it came to this image, because we've just had quite an intense female page, I wanted to make sure that we had go back to the more neutral sort of colours and everything like that. That's why I chose to crop out all of her clothing. I also chose to use a steel background, which I have not used yet, as well as using white for all of my wording. This is again just to show that there is nothing specific gender related on this page. So I really like the idea of making the direct address to the pull quote this time, as I had done in the previous one. So I think this works pretty well, and this pull quote is massive. If you compare it to these two as well, it's very impressive. I also decided that I was going to use a different font on this page, as I did want to catch more attention, but also for it to stand out more. I decided that I was going to have this white strip going across the back, which isn't a typical convention. So everything else on this page is quite normal for a magazine to have. So the massive pull quote, the name tag, the masthead, the little credit thing going on down there. It's all there, but I decided that I wasn't going to do that. I also made sure that I include the same line strips, so then there was a connection going between them and everything like that. So when it came to the background for this one, I wanted to make sure that it was again dark, because I didn't want to break that thing which I've been going on. I think it works pretty well. I'm quite happy with it. And yeah, it didn't seem too wrong to use it, actually, which I'm quite happy about. So I think that pretty much sums up this page. Oh, just as a quick note, this is quite a typical page to have in a magazine, as they will want to make sure that there is a break in between all of this text, which it definitely does need. Yeah, I think I've talked about everything on from that one. Okay, so moving on to this one. This one, already, to me, it doesn't have the same impact, but I think that that's okay because of the whole pink here. Wait, how did I go on to that one? With the pink here and then the blue down here. I think because I have that, and it's just addressing the representational issue of gender, I think that it's okay, if I'm honest, because it really does put an emphasis on my whole main image. So if I go to the conventions again from what I have stuck to with this page, so I've listened to the tagline, I've listened to the masthead, masthead, the main image, how there's one main image, how that my images, or image in this case, has got the what's it called? Has got the image caption. I've got the article. It's quite I've abided by the rules quite a lot for this one, so nothing was a massive surprise for me. One thing to consider for this page is that it's larger. So the next big, I really emphasize that, and I think that that really represents my intro article really well, because this is quite a large font if you compare it to all of these ones, and there's a lot going on in that. And in this one, it's quite a short one. So this was purely because I thought that I was writing a little bit too much, so I thought that I would give my viewers a little bit of an easy intro to my article. So that was definitely something. You can see here I stuck to the whole, you need a drop cap at the start of your articles. However, on this one I had to use 2 for the letters instead of just 1. This was because when I did it for the one character, by the way, this was that I didn't realise that it was messing around and just doing its own thing, and it wasn't good, if I'm honest, because I thought it was losing its mind, if I'm honest. I didn't really understand why. Anyway, so that's why I had to do 2, otherwise you would have just seen the quotation, which defeats the whole point, if I'm honest. So this is a great example of when a magazine would need to enlarge more than one character. I think that this is actually a really good convention to follow, and it is a bit underrated. It might have been nice to have a bit more variety, maybe have a whole word of it instead, but it's still pretty good, I'm not gonna lie. I think that was definitely something to take into consideration here. So again, I've got the typical size paragraphs for my article body itself. Like, nothing's too big or anything like that, so it's more manageable to read. I've made sure that all of them are in line, because otherwise I can't deal with them not being in line. And when you're skimming it, you'll see words which definitely do pop out to you. So if I just read this now, from here, nothing really jumps out. 1991, I don't know why that came out. This came out. Nothing really popped out. Donate $2,000. Yeah, nothing. Yeah. London. Charity. So even if my audience just skim reads it like this, you can see that you can actually take quite a lot of information, even from such a short amount of text. So there was something about a collection from 1991, something about a Vera Wang dress, and donating $2,000, London, and charity. Like, you can almost get an overview from that than just reading the whole intro article, which is actually what quite a lot of the audience does. It's just like a typical thing when you're flicking through the pages. You want something to really grab your attention. And I think that partly to do with my masthead will do this, but I think that will really help. Just going back to my masthead quickly, it's not as normal to use 4 different things. So technically, none of these words are the same. By that, I'm talking about the font, the size, the bold, the italic. None of these are the same. So these are the same height. However, this one has obviously got some metallic stuff going on. The word big is pretty big, I'm not gonna lie. Like, that's obviously what I meant to do with it, so then it would stand out, but yeah, that's quite intense. And then things just, that was the original, what it was like. So you can see that I have really developed and changed when it came to all of this, which is kind of nice to see that happens. So on this page as well, you can see that I have included the fashion review again. This was because the last time I included this, I thought that it worked quite well, and especially how on that page there's a fair amount going on this page. Like, you can see the secondary images, there's still a lot of writing, a lot of intro. My masthead, although it doesn't take up a lot of room visually, well, literally, but visually I think it takes up a lot. Yeah, that one's quite busy. So to have it here, it makes a really big difference in my opinion, like a really big difference. So I'm definitely glad that I did do that. So moving on to the next part of this page, I want to talk more about the main image on this one. So I've stuck with my idea of not giving direct eye contact to the audience. This time you can see I chose an image where she was looking down, hence why the article is down there. I've also, as I mentioned about the clothing, that's why I chose those colours instead of anything else. When it came to her makeup, I didn't want to overdo it. This was because I wanted to challenge the stereotype that all girls need to wear loads of makeup and you're not pretty without it. Because you can clearly see she's not an ugly girl and that she has got natural beauty. So I really wanted to show that off. This can also relate to guys because they wear makeup nowadays. They're perfectly entitled to. But it's also showing them that they don't necessarily have to. So it's more focusing on the natural side of everything as well, which is quite nice. Down here, on all of my pages, you'll be able to see a image caption. So for these, I chose to use a slightly different font, just so then it wouldn't blend in as much and it would have something which stood it apart from everything else, which I'm happy to say it has. I've also, I don't know if you can see this, but here I've got Words by Samantha Willingham. This is normal for a magazine to have and include, just so then it is the credits and it allows some maybe upcoming artists or bloggers or whatever they are, it allows them to have their moment of shine to show, oh yeah, look, I wrote this, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, so it allows them to have a bit more time. Yeah, so it's definitely important to mention that this can be beneficial for anybody who is wanting to go into that industry, for example. So it shows them that you can do it. And that it doesn't really matter, even if it's just one article, it's a starting point, and yeah. So I'm not sure if I have mentioned this or not yet, but the social grade, or the social group, which I'm aiming for, was the A to C bracket. This was because I know that a lot of that audience will have disposable income, which they're willing to spend on, say, just from this, the Vera Wang dress, or even like the Met Gala. You're going to need a fair amount of money to be able to go to that and to be able to do that. So I think that really does show the sort of aim which I'm going for. However, I also included it to C because on my front cover, you can see that I referred the Missguided website. So I think that this was my version of a box out, as my whole magazine is trying to be based around the more higher end. However, I included that on the front so then it wouldn't necessarily attract all of the wrong attention which I want for the magazine. So more normal people would be, I say normal with quotation marks, even though you can't see me doing that. Yeah, so it was to make sure that more average, everyday people pick up the magazine as well, and they're not off-put from it. It also means that the people who are they look down on others, are turned off by the magazine, which is a good thing in my opinion, as I wouldn't want my magazine to be associated with people who can't be nice to each other. So that's just not a good thing. So yeah. All of my pull quotes for my main article are quite inspirational, and that's a theme which I really did want to show. So I'm just me on holiday. Power, persuasion. Oh God, why did I read it in that order? So you've got I'm just me on holiday. Passion, power, and persuasion. Who said that you can only be good at one thing? Who said that you can only be good? Who said you can't be good at more than one thing? And then finally the last one, which we're going to come to in a bit. See, all of them are quite inspirational, and I think that it's important to mention that that's the sort of goals which we want to set, not the whole, yeah, you need to do this to your body, you need to do that to your body, you need to wear this amount of makeup, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, we're not doing any of that. We're talking about how you can just be you and be quite happy. So all of the article tones in this one, it's not meant to be seen as braggy at all. It's meant to be quite relatable and everything like that. So I have made sure that I have put some more personal things in there. So her opinion about the environment, which is a very heated topic. I don't know how I got that in there. Yeah, you can see the word determination, inspirational, lovely, fire within her. Just, it's not meant to be braggy. It's meant to be uplifting and everything like that. So yeah, that's pretty much this one again. I just want to reiterate, if you've forgotten, that this shadow here, it's meant to be there. This is basically just the drop shadow behind this bar, and I think that it faded out really nicely. That's why I've continued to include it, as I really like it. One thing to say, which I'm not sure if you have noticed on all of these, is that her hair was, I'm not gonna lie, I really struggled with cutting out hair, but I think that that was definitely one of the challenges which I had to overcome for my magazine, as I wanted to have the black background to help and understand the more dyslexic audience. I had to do that at the risk, or at the risk of the images themselves. So you can see here, like, I've cut this bit out amazing, but then this bit wasn't as good, you could say. This one's pretty all round good. Like, it's difficult to cut anything out from a white background because it's not meant to go on black. But personally, I think that it is definitely a triumph, and that, yeah, it's pretty damn good. I'm not gonna lie. So moving on to this page. This is the last double page which I had of my main article. So now I'm going to be, the first thing which I want to talk about before I talk about anything else is one of the main conventions for the main article which I broke, which you've probably been thinking about, but I want to make sure that I address it now. So in a normal magazine, they would have this page here, then this article wouldn't stop here, it would carry on to this page, and you wouldn't have the masthead or the intro paragraph or any of that. I didn't do that, as you can see. This is because I wanted it to be like a build-up, like you get to a build-up to finding out her name, even though they're in the name tags, but they're not in the title. So for example, dress to impress. So it makes the audience think, oh, okay, well, who are we trying to impress? Who's this person who is doing the impressing and everything like that? then spend it the right way. It makes the audience wonder, whose opinion is this? Why should I listen to them? Who are they? Then here, again, they're giving you a really inspirational quote. But technically, unless you look up here, you don't know her name because you haven't seen it in the title yet. And here, the next big thing. So now you're finding, well, the audience is finding out that she's an upcoming new celebrity, basically. And then finally, on this double page, it says, The Unstoppable Bethany. So that's what I intended for my magazine, and I feel as though that's quite a big convention to break. I'm still quite happy that I did it because I think it looks okay. I don't think that it was the wrong decision to make at all. I like how it builds up, and it definitely does lead to the overall, like, just look at her, she's unstoppable sort of vibe. I think that that's a really nice thing to have, so I don't mind that at all or in the slightest. Yeah, I do really like that actually. I really do. So that's the reason behind the layout, because I think you'll probably be wondering, why has she done this? It's not looking like a magazine. It's not following conventions. What is she doing? Does she even know that she's done it? Yes, I do know. I know that I've done it. I have reasons for why I've done it. And yeah, I know that I've done it. So let's start off with the background. So it's not really normal for a fashion magazine especially to have a background. Normally they'll just use a white background for every single page. As you've already seen, I have broken this rule as I hate it, and I also want to appeal to the dyslexic market as well, which I think I've done pretty well. If I'm honest, I'm quite happy with how I've done it. So, as you can see here, she's happy. I'm not gonna lie. She seems very, very happy. Yeah, so I wasn't talking about her, I was talking about the background. Duh. Yeah, so on this background, instead of just having the black one, I decided that I was going to incorporate these lights. This is again because I wanted to relate to the idea of the typical Hollywood star on the door, so that sort of light. I know that I haven't got an actual star, but I think that would have been too, look at her, look at me, look at everything on this page, and it would have been quite off-putting. So I decided that I would add these hanging lights, which are quite relatable actually, and it's quite nice just to make sure that you do have it. Yeah, I was really happy with these actually, the way which they just fit onto the page. The only issue is where they collide with the bookmark down the page. I think that looks a little bit odd, but everywhere else, where it's behind the masthead and all of the words, I don't think that it stands out too much, which is really good actually. As you can see on my drafting, especially on the drafting page, you'll be able to see how much I struggled with the masthead and all the words to make sure that it really did stand out from all of this chaos going on behind it, because it's quite intensely packed, especially around this bit, because I've got a lot of words on it anyway, so that was quite intense to have. But I found a way by using a drop shadow, which you can see here. As it's on black and I chose to use the black, it didn't make it over the top. So for example, I didn't have the words were in purple, then I did it in white. It wasn't anything horrendously bold like that. It was just quite a normal standing out thing. So before, as you can see, the words were just white, and then I decided that it would be a good idea to I decided that it would be a good idea to put this drop shadow in, just so then it created that more, it's not just sitting on the page, it is a bit further out there. So yeah, I'm very, very happy with this masthead and the way which it looks. So I have followed a lot of conventions for this. So for example, I've used the spacing bar to make this fill the page, or at least to be in line with the article down here and everything. But yeah, I think that worked pretty well. I've also made sure that all of these were in line, which was quite important to me. I don't think it shows as a normal convention about how long you do spend to make sure all of this works right, especially for the audience. But when you're doing it, you do notice all of these small details as you're the one putting them there. So I think that this is a convention which magazines follow. It just is. Yeah, so that's why I think that works well. This article intro, again, it's that sort of grey colour, so it doesn't stand out too much, but then it definitely does. So this article, as it is mainly about her, I decided to go less about the overall fashion, which a lot of people can relate to. I wanted to make it about the audience. Not about the audience, about her, which will only relate to a few of the audience, which is really not a typical convention, as that normally means that you won't sell very many. But bearing in mind that I've already had 4 pages of how she's relating to the audience and how she's just one of us, I genuinely think that this would work and be okay. So on this page, I decided that I was going to have 2 pull quotes instead of just 1. This was partly due to the amount of writing which there was. I thought that it would be unbalanced just to have 1, especially how it goes on to the next page. So I had quite a lot of struggle with that little bit which went on to the next page, as I didn't really want to do this, but I think that as it's in line here, God, that was a dodgy line. As it's in line there, it sort of flows quite nicely and it doesn't stand out too much. So yeah, I think that's a really good point to follow. Again, all the conventions are quite simple here. It was quite a nice one to do, this one. Just going back to the main image, I haven't even done the main image yet. So as you can see, she's properly smiling. So in all of the other ones, it's closed mouth. If it is a little bit open, it's not that much, but it's quite content. Even on these 2, it's nothing over the top. But as it was the final image or the final double page for her in this section, I thought that she should have a big finale. So with the masthead standing out, with the main image standing out, I think that it definitely does make this page different from all of the others. So as I've mentioned on all of the other pages, with the whole pink and blue representation to stereotypes, the whole female and male thing, on this page I decided that I was going to use yellow. So again, this is quite a neutral colour. It's not really either or. So I think that worked pretty well, actually. Again, I know that there's a fair amount of purple in here, but it's not overwhelming for say. It's quite relaxed and everything. So I think that's okay. She is making direct eye contact with the masthead. If you follow the line of her eye, it's like over here. If that wasn't a dodgy line, you get what I was trying to do though. yeah, I think that was really important. I also want to mention the image captions. And the way which I strategically placed it where the audience is going to look. So this is a typical magazine convention, or a trick if you want to think of it like that. But they normally put it around the head area. As say you put it down here, you wouldn't notice it as quickly as you would if it is up here. So that is purely why I put it up there, because I've seen them do it in a few places, and that's the reason why. So then you can really be drawn into this. Okay, so that was all for my main article. Now I have a few example articles for what the rest of my magazine would look like. So as you can see in my magazine and in every other magazine, I carried on the background for mine, which is the black. I think that this worked pretty well, personally, as it's still quite content. There's nothing really wrong about it per se. It stands out from every other magazine because they all use white paper. This is probably because of the printing costs and everything like that, but that's not the reason why I chose to use black paper instead of white. So on this double page, I've broken a few conventions more than I have for the main articles. So I'm going to talk about the ones which I have broken. So on this image, on this page, I have a main image which has gone over the margin, which would go about here. Okay, so that line is literally the margin about there. So as you can see, this part of the image is like way over. Although I know that you're going to lose it in the binder, I think that it was important to break that single page. And it just opens up the whole nother page, even with such a small amount of the image actually on it. So that's definitely something to take into consideration. So yeah, I really do love this image. One, it's sticking to my conventions as she's not making direct eye contact with the audience, so the directed address is still focusing on the article itself rather than her. I chose to match her hair to her jumper. So unlike the other article, my main article, I wanted her to have her own artist style off of it, which I think did work pretty well in the end, actually. Yeah, it worked pretty well, which I'm quite happy about. Yeah, that worked quite well. Also, red's quite a gender neutral colour, which is really good for my magazine as it's not insinuating anything, which is good. Okay, another convention which isn't as typical but it's not fully broken is the masthead. So as you can see here, here and here, I have overlapped the masthead. This definitely brings up mixed feelings for everybody, as some people are like, oh my god, that's actually such a nice idea. Other people are like, ew, what have you done? That looks really bad, it shouldn't be touching. Personally, I think it's okay as they're not the same colour, and you can clearly see that the front words are a darker grey shade, whereas the back ones are white. I think that as I have that differentiation, God, I can't speak, because I have that because I have the difference, it's okay, and it doesn't hurt anybody's head. So again, my article, it's normal. There's nothing over the top about it. It's detailed. You've got a really good pull quote in the very center of the page, as well as the article actually, which makes it more impactful. Yeah. Okay, that's all I'm going to talk about that page for. Okay, so this, if you've been paying attention, this is the image which is black and white on my contents page. So finally the audience can see what their influential designer likes to wear. I really like this trick of hiding, as it does force the audience to look at the magazine to see what sort of things they are wearing. This is a really clever trick and convention which quite a few magazines which I've seen have done, which is always a good thing. So on this page you can clearly see that this is my masthead, or not my masthead, my main image, this one here. I'm really happy with the colours and how vibrant this image is, especially when I exaggerated it a little bit. But I didn't have to exaggerate it loads because, again, that would be going against what I was saying. The whole natural side, by the way. I have overlapped it, you can see it here. So it's breaking that boundary. I also have it interacting with my border as well as the text. So there's a lot happening in that very small spot of space. Although it was an issue that it could be quite distracting or everything like that, I personally don't think that it's that bad. If I'm honest, I think that it's worked out pretty well in the end. Got there in the end. So moving on to the secondary image. So it depends on the magazine which you look at, will depend on whether this is a normal or not a normal convention. So from the magazines which I saw, this wasn't an issue, but I know that if you looked at other magazines, this just wouldn't be done. So what I'm talking about now is cutting out a secondary image. So normally a magazine would just cut out the main image, but then wouldn't bother with the secondary image, which is what I have done. But I think that this one needed to come off of the page and actually just needed to be there. To be honest, it just needed to be there. So in order to do that, I have made sure that she's cut out, and I've even wrapped the text around her to make her engage with that. This is quite a normal trick for a magazine, so that's nothing shocking or over the top. It's quite normal. I wouldn't really expect anything less. So this title's a little bit different. This masthead, sorry. So unlike all of the others, this is a very vibrant and bright purple. The reasons why I did this is so then it could catch a little bit more attention. That was practically it, so then it could catch a bit more attention. So I know that, again, I've spent a long time making sure that this line matches up with this line, even though that's wonky. This line matches up with that one. I just wanted to make sure that it was all matching. I've also made sure that fashion was slightly smaller and sitting on top of phenomenon. That's because my main word here is a phenomenon, and that's what could be related to the designer herself, as that's what she could have been referred to. So even in my intro article, I started off with a rhetorical question. So even though it's not the main thing about this image, it really does catch the attention. If you haven't heard about this amazing person, where have you been? That's how I personally read it, although I know that everybody else reads it in a slightly different way, which is fine. There's no right or wrong way technically, but yeah, it's getting there. So moving on to this page, this is a complementary page to go with the previous one. So as she is a designer, I think that, well, at the time I thought that it would be a really nice idea to follow around this influencing designer to see what sort of things she likes to do. So I followed her around for the day, and as you can see we did a lot. This could be quite attractive to the audience because especially if people are followers or if they love to that sort of thing. If they're more of like a follower than an influencer, this is the sort of thing which I would expect them to do. So before I just forget it, talking about the model herself, as you can see, she's wearing the red. So for both of the designers which I have in my magazine, they are both wearing red. This was not a mistake, it was planned for. I wanted to make sure that they had a more vivid impact than just the typical darker colours like blue, or even purple's quite dark. I just wanted them to stand out a little bit more than all of the others, which I comfortably can say that it has. So one of the main conventions which I have broken for this page is the whole border idea. So this isn't exactly a normal thing to do for a magazine. I've seen it done in a film magazine called Empire, and that's where I got the idea from, the inspiration. So they laid out all of the latest, or the top, I think it was the top 20 films which were coming out for that year in particular, which did actually work quite well. So I thought that it would be nice to show the same idea for my model or my designer. So unlike all of the other pages, I didn't want to bombard it with writing. So this is quite similar to this page up here. Where is it? Down. This is quite similar to this simple page, as there's not as much going on, but there's still a little bit. So as you can see, I chose to use a font which is more in the style of the artist rather than my typical style of writing. I think that it definitely does stand out, and yeah. So personally, again, if you just skim read it, you can see I've written Hong Kong. Personally, I see traffic, photogenic, free spirit, fun side, yellow. Yeah. Those are the words which really stand out to me. So even from that, you can tell a lot about the person, which is what I was saying before. And that's why it's so important to make sure that in a magazine, you make sure that you get the right words which you want to presume about your magazine, which is always important. Okay, so I didn't want that writing, the article itself, to take up so much room in that little gap in the middle, really. So that's where I came up with the idea of doing a really large pull quote saying, "Do what you love most." Again, this is quite an inspirational thing, and I think that it'll be good for all of the dyslexic people reading this, as well as the people from different genders, letting them know that it doesn't matter what gender you are and that you can do whatever you want. So I think that this pull quote can be relatable for a lot of people, and that's why I thought that it was appropriate for this. I've also got some subtle marketing in here. For example, Shake Shack. I've also got the AIA Ferris wheel going on here, and the IFC you can see over here. These places will be known in Hong Kong, so it's quite obvious where these photos are all taken. So moving on to this double page, the dancing sensation. Although this doesn't really fit in with my whole fashion idea, I thought that it would be really nice to show that there is a little bit of variety and it's not all the same boring stuff. So this is my main image here. That is my main image. I'm really happy in which the ways the light and the angles are caught on this image. So this isn't a typical image which you would see in a magazine, as technically they would complain about the face being too low lit and how you can't really see her arms very well, and they would complain about it. However, I genuinely really like this image, as I think that it's a statement piece rather than anything else, which was definitely important for me. So again, I haven't done anything different for the masthead or anything here. The article is again all the same. This image, my secondary image, was the second one which I decided to cut out. This was because I wanted her hands, her arms, to interact with the article itself in the way which it has done. So when I flipped it around, so if her hand was then going over here and then she went down, if her hand was over there, it didn't have the same impact, because for one, I'd have to have her stomach pointing over here and it didn't look as right. I also think because of where her hands are, it leads the audience to read these two paragraphs a lot more, just because you've got her hand saying, oh, look at these, look at these. So I think that's a really nice thing. So this was the last article which I included in my magazine. So the first thing which personally I noticed is this pull quote and my masthead. These are really something different and they stand out a lot, actually. It's a really good thing. Yeah, so I spent a lot of time spending it on my masthead, making sure that it's perfect. This is quite a typical convention to follow. There's nothing really strange here. However, on this page, I'm just going to talk about the different things which I've done. So, for example, I've put a box behind all of my article and everything, which I haven't done any others. This isn't a typical magazine convention, as normally they wouldn't have to deal with this problem as they would deal with a white background. But we'll come back to the background in a minute. I think that by using these boxes, it has enabled me to continue my background idea and my own background convention, but then not go over the top about it. As I've just touched upon with the background, it's an image. It's not just a black picture. If you actually read this here, you can see here that I have talked a lot about it and why I chose to put this part in focus, and then why I chose to put this bit in focus but then not have her face in focus. I have talked about in my slides, so I don't want to keep repeating myself. However, when it came to the positioning of these boxes, I wanted to make sure that you could clearly still see her face, as that was really important in my opinion, because that's the most engaging thing. I also decided that as she was the blurry thing, that I would make direct eye contact with her eyes and have the direct address coming from there, and it definitely does draw in the attention, and it makes you evenly distribute your attention for the rest of the page. So as you can see here, I have these 3 secondary images. They're all taken from different locations, and yeah, I think that they work quite nicely in a row. I've got them on a curve relating to my contents page, and it's worked quite nicely. So this is my last page. As you can see here, I have a full length image and a quarter image, or 3/4. This is not a typical magazine convention. So they wouldn't normally have an image which stops here. That was just not the done thing. But I think that it was worth it rather than just having this zoomed in, as it wouldn't have as big of an impact as including all of this over here. So that's the reason why I did that. I wanted to include the pull quote up here because it was a fair amount of room, and that's the best way to use up space, which is again just a normal magazine convention. I've again made my image caption a lot bigger on this page because it needs to have more of an impact. Just talking about my model quickly, as you can see, she's wearing black, white here. This is so then it doesn't draw in the attention, but then it also relates to my whole representational issue of the gender, which really shows that I'm not stereotyping at all. Personally, these are two of my favourite pages from the whole magazine, as I love the whole vibes of the light reflecting off of the wrought iron, and I really love the effect which it has. I think that it's a nice final page to finish on. So that basically sums up my question 1. If I go back, how does your product use or challenge conventions, and how does it represent social groups or issues? So yeah, cool.